If you're on a specific mature buck right now, this could be one of the best stretches of the year. This is with Bobby Kendall on how to hunt the last stretch of October. Here we go. This is just my personal experience. Like sometimes you end up getting new bucks in the later part of October on like a hub scrape or something else that maybe you hadn't had pictures of before. And do you think that is the reason as their testosterone's increasing, as you mentioned, like that's probably like the bullseye is getting bigger of where that deer's covering?
Yep, and funny you say that. Like, I've had some bigger farms that I've had cameras on and had multiple mature deer, and I've literally seen them as they break up in September and stuff. They each kind of have their own, like, zone, if you will, within that older age class. One will be here, one will be here, one will be here. And I've seen where it doesn't seem like they overlap a whole lot, but then all of a sudden, and I literally what you just said, I call it the boomerang phase. It happens every year to a T on Illinois, like October 27th, 8th, 9th. And if you watch those days, you'll see it happen. All of a sudden, you'll get a deer of yours who's over here, or he's over there, or you'll get a new deer, which was probably living just over the property line, a couple hundred yards, and you're just now getting them. It's kind of
Mhm.
what that deer that I shot this year did earlier because that front was pretty powerful.
Mhm.
But but that's one of those things where, if you're following that date phase or mindset and you're ahead of the deer, well, you might say, I know this deer's on the neighbors. I'm going to take the 27th, 8th, and 9th off, and I'm just gonna go sit on this scrape because it's close. He hasn't been there yet, but I don't wanna be the guy that gets his picture and then says I should have been there. So it's like a lot of things like that that you're theorizing about, and they're your beliefs and stuff, and you're trying to be ahead of that deer. In October, it's it's not as important because they're pretty much doing the same thing the whole month. But when you get in November, stuff changes so fast that it's really important to be thinking like a deer and be out in front of what he's going to do next rather than trying to, chase his tail around.
Mhm. Do you think there's anything that people overlook from trail camera pictures this time of year? Let's just say for the second half of October, whether they're not getting a deer on picture or maybe they are, and maybe any mistakes that might draw from that.
The biggest thing with the cameras that I would say is I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, my buck is nocturnal." Well, that's what they do. They are nocturnal animals, for the most part. It is very important to pay attention and get excited about everything they do at night, and then anticipate that's what they're gonna do in daylight when you do see them on a Magic X day, 5 days, 3 days before the full whatever. When
Mhm.
everything collides and he gets up in daylight, you need to have that intel of where he enters the plot, which scrape, where his primary scrapes are, and um, so just not worrying about them being nocturnal or not, and just using all that information to kind of assemble your game plan.
Mhm. And so when you mentioned for the guy that maybe they know of a big deer from last year, or maybe they found one in velvet, and he's kind of not living on their farm for sure. They feel pretty confident that. Let's say it's a 40 or something like that,
Yep.
and they heard this and they're thinking, man, I do have the 27th, 8th, and 9th off. Describe what that scrape in your mind. What are some attributes of that scrape where they maybe should try to predict where he might be?
Yep. Well, it's gonna be scrape well, about scrapes, like, somebody the other day was like, "I'm surprised you're hunting scrapes this early and not hunting food," and I said, "Well, they kinda go hand in hand." Like, you know, they're going to the food and stuff, they but the scrapes are kinda that's where you're gonna, like, get the intel of what food source he's on, and it's the spot that's gonna get him in bow range if the food plot's a little bit big, and, the big thing is on the day that he walks in daylight in October, he's gonna be rambunctious, and he's gonna be marking his territory, and those scrapes die right in the beginning of November, they just die, for the most part, um So really October is the time to be hunting those. And you know, and I'll do a lot of stuff with the scrapes. Like on that plot, I make sure I cut down any branches that weren't in bow range, so I force him to that scrape. And um, you know, we do a lot with the tree coys and stuff, and and which I guess is a mock scrape, you know. And the thing about scrapes are, if you really pay attention to them, like they're always at a concentration of scent. So if you're gonna make a mock scrape or whatever, you need to put it in a place that they want to scrape naturally. So like those scrapes that you find down in the woods and stuff, usually they're not random. If you find a scrape in the, you know, in the future, if you look at the scrape and you start kind of looking at what's going around, it's almost always some type of a concentration of scent. And if you think like a deer and you're going through the woods in the night or whatever, and all of a sudden and you're kind of rambunctious and stuff because it's your bedroom and your home, and boom, you get a whole bunch of scent because it's all concentrated there. You get rammy and and you mark your territory. So, you know, if you're doing stuff with mock scrapes and stuff, you know, just always try and be thinking about concentration of scent or creating a concentration of scent. Like a lot of times in a food plot, you know, I'll put up a piece of, you know, stretch of fence or one stringle strand of barbed wire, or I'll pull a tree limb out in the field to get them to walk around it, or I'll do something. And a lot of times when you do that, especially if it's something substantial like a fence, and you create a pinch point, you've created a concentration of scent where they're going to naturally want to scrape. So then you start compounding strategy. You put a tree coy there. It's somewhere they want to scrape anyway because there's a concentration of scent. Now you've upped your odds that A, he comes there, and B, you start upping your odds of, you know, having him stop broadside and
Hmm.
be doing something to where you can get your bow drawn. And, you know, so there's lots of little things
Like
like
you said,
that.
stacking your odds. That's what that
Stacking
comes down to.
stacking odds. Yeah. I talk about like macro strategy and micro, and that micro stuff can get really granular, but it all, I mean, man, it all adds up.
Hmm.
A
So
lot of deer live because of those last couple moments. You know what I mean?
expect, yeah, especially for bow hunting. Yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah.
so much has to go right to get a deer in your lap in order to draw back, hold your anchor, and squeeze one off. That's yeah, for sure. And so I guess for someone listening, they're thinking, you know, because someone's more than likely has a deer in mind, B is probably thinking of some sort of scrape or maybe a mock scrape that they created. But it sounds like find the scrape with concentration of scent on a way to a food
So
source.
so when you have a big deer and you know he's in an area, try and find every scrape you can on those field edges, because those are the ones you're going to want to be hunting. And just run a camera on all of them, and just you'll know which one is his dominant one. You'll know which one is the one he's hitting at in daylight or earliest in the evening or the most frequent, and that's, you know, that's the one that you're going to want to be on
Hmm.
for sure. And another thing about the scrapes is, like, if you're backing up, if you're scouting like in the wintertime or whatever, or you got a new farm earlier in the year, man, I'm on a lot of farms that time of year, and new farms, and I am always pinning them. I
Hmm.
call it my scrape map. That it don't make sense at all, and and you might have no idea what deer it is, and that doesn't matter, because then all of a sudden the next year when you got a giant running around, that thing comes to life, and you're like, oh,
You can see literally
now
the dots connect, quite literally.
you now all of a sudden you were like, I got to go put a camera here, here, here. You know, this makes sense. That was probably, you know, so those scrapes are really, they're like gold.